If you're inspired and motivated by this conversation, we're starting our Happy Heart course on March the 4th. It's a 4-week approach of adopting a whole food plant-based diet to prevent and reverse heart disease. It's food and lifestyle based, and
there's live support sessions, there's workshops, and it's with a cardiologist with over 30 years experience and who is plant-based himself.
So it's deeply rooted in science, 4 weeks to prevent and reverse heart disease starting March the 4th. You'll find details in the show notes of this podcast, or you can go to our website, thehappypear.ie, and find out more about it.
Let's be honest, the medical knowledge doubles every 73 days.
Every 73 days?
Yeah, exactly. So, reading for pleasure, reading for knowledge, reading for personal growth, it's kind of like on the back shelf, or front shelf in this case. But I'm hoping to get to the point where I can actually do that at some point. But keeping up with the literature that's a full-time job.
Well, so literally every 2 months, like just over every 2 months, it doubles, like the actual medical literature and the information doubles in terms of health and well-being.
That's right. And you can carve out your little sector like cardiology or nutrition, but it's still rapidly growing. And obviously, particularly in the United States, you're responsible for more than it. You're responsible for everyone else's specialty when you're seeing a patient, morally, ethically, and if not legally, but it's important to be able to impact, particularly when you do something like we do, which is lifestyle medicine. It affects all the organs. It can't just be a cardiologist. Those were the fun days.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like the way to see the human body in isolation is kind of naive, because it's one holistic system, and whether it's the heart or the gut or the mind, they're all intrinsically linked. Could you talk on that for a sec?
So, we got a full dose of that. I mean, I think cardiology sort of rejected it, and people would say that anxiety causes a heart disease. And, the person who, finds out that their family member has had a car accident and, was fatal, and they, grab their chest and fall over and die. And it's kind of like, everybody had heard all that, but nobody really believed that that was a mechanism. Then many years ago, there was a recognition that there is so-called stress-induced cardiomyopathy, meaning that someone tells you something horrible. And I have to admit, I saw most of it when I was chief of cardiology at Wayne State. You'd have 4 people getting a government check and going to the casinos, and an 85-year-old lady gambles away her food and rent, trying to make more money through gambling, and they would literally get that stress-induced cardiomyopathy. It looks for all the world like a heart attack. It's a heart attack induced by the brain.
Wow.
And the stress that's happening. And it's got a fancy name, Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. The Takotsubo is, if you look it up, it's actually the octopus trap that they use in Japan. And because that's exactly the shape of the heart after it's had that kind of damage. So anyway, after Takotsubo came out, we kind of got to start to realize that these brain-heart connections are real. And then people started to pay attention to stress in people's lives and how it can, with things that we should have known, cortisol levels, catecholamines, that's adrenaline, raise your blood pressure, damage your blood vessels, more strokes, more heart attacks. And so now I have to tell you that there have been some people, particularly in the vegan world, who knew this the whole time, like Dean Ornish. And in fact, Dean Ornish had this down to a T. You stop smoking, you exercise, get yourself in a loving environment, good social connections, and you change to a whole food plant-based diet, and all of your cardiac stuff and all your risk factors dramatically improve. And he was always saying that the mindfulness part of it and stress reduction were as important as everything else. And it's actually very true.
Yeah, well, it's the same for gut health that, I think they say that 70% of IBS is typically stress induced. So it seems like it's not surprising in that sense. But one place I'd love to talk to you, we were just discussing there earlier, was about that the biggest killer of cardiologists is heart attacks.
Yeah.
Which sounds very ironic in a sense.
But not surprising also when you look at the wider population at large. Still the number one killer is heart disease.
It's the number one killer in the US, but not in other countries. And I wonder if you could talk about that, because that seems, or is there a change in that over your career? Because you've been a cardiologist for 30 years or approximately at this stage.
Yeah, I started academic cardiology. If you include my first rotation at Grady, this is my 45th year.
45th!
Well done.
Academic cardiology. So, let's talk about the last part first. Sort of the world distribution of heart disease. Number one globally for a long time. Then a lot of the advances in treatment of heart disease have improved it to the point where the survival of patients with heart disease is pretty high. So pretty much every advanced or high-income, HIC, high-income country actually has heart disease fall into number two, because we're so good at managing it, detecting it, scan people, stress tests, stent them, bypass, everything's working. So why is there one high-income country in the world, that's the United States of America, where heart disease is still the number one killer? And you can understand why outside of high-income countries, it is the number one killer in all the other countries, but only one high-income country. And that's because our risk is so high and our habits, and there's not enough folks paying attention to your podcast and changing their diet and trying to get healthier from the inside out. And so we can do all the mopping up the floor with the most fancy mops, but it's never going to be as good as turning off the faucet.
That's such a good one.
So,
you said risk there. You said the risk is like, how come the risk is higher in the US? Is that purely down to lifestyle based, or is purely lifestyle? So if you have a country where the things that people enjoy become very prominent, and that's sitting watching television, and as a former professional tennis player, I can tell you that pickleball taking over tennis courts just grates on you, because the courts are just going away. And then you realize, wait a minute, these are Americans getting out of their living room, off of the couch, and going and playing a sport that pretty much anyone can play, as opposed to tennis. You kind of have to be an athlete to play tennis, but pickleball, everybody's doing it. So things like that can change this dynamic that I've been talking about, this risk. And of course, exercise, whatever I say about exercise, you multiply it by a factor of, 7, 8, 9, or 10, and that's nutrition. And I'm sorry to report, if you guys put my name in Google or, the International Journal of Disease Reversal, you'll see a recent article that we published on physician nutrition. The title is What's on Our Plate? And it's where we sort of made the observation with my research team that, I know this is going to sound strange, but that people who were plant-based, we all knew that people who were plant-based were having less problem with COVID. Question that we were asking was, if you were plant-based, did you have less problem with COVID vaccine? That is, less of the, fever, chills, all the stuff that people can get for a day or two after a vaccine. And our preliminary sort of working group, it was absolutely true. Those who were eating animals were, they take a day off of work, or they'd be, sore. The rest of us who were plant-based, we got a sore deltoid muscle. That's about it. And everything else, you felt perfectly fine. So we thought we would pursue this in a bunch of people who were reliable, that is, physicians and knowledgeable. And my research assistant, Michelle Ikram, had actually moved over because of some program issues, had moved over to Loyola, and I was at Rush. And so we did Loyola University and Rush University in Chicago, and we sent out the survey to physicians. We divided it, the typical dietary patterns. Out of 274 doctors, there was one plant-based. Wow. Was that you?
And no, I didn't take the survey because I was part of the.
Of course, yeah.
And so, that one person out of 274, the rest were eating things that have medical literature demonstrating very clearly that it's increasing their death rate. That included, fish, ovo-lacto-vegetarian, pesco polo vegetarian, and then the vast majority were omnivores. And it was so disturbing that This is why the leading cause of death is that we as physicians have learned how to treat heart disease, and we haven't focused on prevention. At some point, that has to change, and that's what I'm sort of dedicating the rest of my career to doing. And because if we can capture physicians, we can capture community groups, capture people who are out in front, have more people on social media. Haha! Thank you very much for doing this. We can actually change that dynamic and get people to realize that they are what they eat, and that's a popular Netflix. I don't know.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, really, really
with the twins. Yeah,
oh, it's brilliant.
Exactly.
And then in terms of many people can fall back with the mantra that it's genetics. Oh, my family has it. What percentage roughly does genetics account to in terms of heart disease or heart issues?
We never ever thought we'd become health ambassadors. As 21-year-olds, we were meat-eating, pint-swilling, burger-munching jocks. And lo and behold, a year later, age 22, we adopted a plant-based diet, gave up alcohol, started into yoga and swimming in the sea, and that's been 20 years now.
In terms of physical health, we think it starts at your feet. We've been wearing Vivo barefoot shoes for about 7 years, and I love them. They're the only type of shoes I wear. I feel more myself. I feel I get more feedback from the environment. My kids wear them. They got a huge different variety of ranges, and they're the only shoe I would wear.
Vivo have offered you, our wonderful listeners, 15% discount when you use the code HAPPYPEAR15 at checkout. And right now, they're offering free access with every purchase to the ultimate resource for natural health, which is a course curated, showcasing our human potential with some of the best and most progressive leaders in the health and wellness space. Check out the link in the show notes to find out more and avail of your discount with the code HAPPYPEAR15 at checkout. That's vivobarefoot.com, HAPPYPEAR15 for 15%
So
off.
obviously, it's 100% because we're human or we're mammalian. And I'm a very wonderful plant-based journal editor. I think there were only 2 of us in the world. I'm sure that there must be some more. I just don't know them. William Roberts, he died after, I think it's about 95 years old. He ran the American Journal of Cardiology for almost 50 years. And he used to always say that unless you have claws and fangs, you are not supposed to eat animal products, okay? Well, I actually checked up on Bill's assertion there. And it turns out that if you have claws and fangs and you eat animal products, your life expectancy isn't that long. Lions live about 25 years. Elephants can live 100 years. And so mammals that eat animals don't do as well. In fact, if you want to create a model of heart disease, all you have to do is cruelly take rabbits, put them in a cage, and feed them animal products, and they develop heart disease. So we have this data, and yet people really don't want to change their habits. And I have to admit to you that when I struggle, I don't usually talk about any brand thing of anything, but artificial. So I won't say which brand. I'll just say artificial intelligence, right? Once that article, What's on Our Plate, got published, it's kind of hit me that how badly we were doing at saving ourselves. And so I actually went to my nearby subscription for artificial intelligence. And I asked the question, if changing to a plant-based diet can save the planet, avoid animal cruelty, reduce healthcare costs, reduce chronic illness, and reduce death rate, why isn't everybody doing it? And the answers it gave me actually were pretty good answers. They were like affordability, education, culture, habit, family, and peer pressure. It went on and on with all the things that we face. But underlying all of that was the fact that my preamble question is something that's not understood by most people and most physicians. They don't realize that we're spending $4 trillion on healthcare in the United States for illnesses that could be completely wiped out or at least mitigated by a whole food plant-based diet. And so that's our job, to get that information out there as much as we can. So thanks for putting on a program.
On the AI thing, I put into ChatGPT, I said, what's the best diet to reverse heart disease? And it's a whole food plant-based diet. And it gave me a whole reasons why. So it's like if AI, who is non-biased and doesn't have food preferences, said that the best diet to reverse heart disease was a plant-based diet, well, then you go, well, that's kind of, this is a machine telling me this. Why are cardiologists, why is there only 1 out of 274 doctors not why aren't there more of them who are plant-based? And I know in the UK there's a great group. There's the plant-based doctors group, which is amazing. It's a really good. We met you at
plant-based medical professionals.
Yeah, plant-based medical professions, and it's amazing. We met you at it when you were speaking when you were over at Wimbledon there a number of years ago, and we heard you speaking. It was wonderful. It really, really was. And is there something similar in the United States where there is groups of plant-based doctors?
Yes, there are groups, and I have to do a shout out to. I just got back from the Australian Open, where we got together with the Doctors for Nutrition over there, and I actually gave a mini symposium on what's on our plate, and I said, here's ChatGPT's 10 answers, and what do you guys think? And there was a lot of thoughtful discussion, and then they wanted to do sort of a breakfast download, and we sort of brainstorming, and it hit me that you're absolutely right. You have the doctors in London, you have many groups in the United States, but one of the things that I hadn't seen us try before was reaching out to the other people. That is, we're all talking about nutrition, but what about the animal rights people? What about the planet sustainability people? Why don't we get meetings of all of us together and see if we can't leverage each other's strengths? There should be, a vegan person at every, methane gas polluting our system. We should be interdigitating, I think, and together we would be stronger. So they actually, threw together that meeting right before the women's finals. We had a little online symposium that everybody was able to get on, and it's about 10 organizations, and they could do more, but you could do it in Ireland, we could do it in the United States. I'm hoping that everybody takes it up and sort of band together, because every time, so I actually, in March, I had my 20th vegan anniversary from, 2003, where I had found out that my cholesterol was elevated, sought what to do about it, and went whole food plant-based at that point. And there's a website that'll tell you your impact. 20 years of plant-based nutrition, it was massive numbers. I don't remember what they are, but the amount of, it wasn't just the animal lives, but the amount of water that I had saved the planet, and the amount of air quality improvement. I'm hoping that everyone realizes it, and it seems to me that the answer is social media.
Yeah, it's such a big question there, because it's like we've been plant-based for 20 years, and our whole business, the Happy Pear, has been about empowering people. And we use the expression eat more veg, because we find it's a good gateway into it, rather than thou shalt become vegan. We find it's to attract people in via really tasty food. And that's our business. We've got cookbooks and recipes and cafes and farms and food products, and they're all to get people to eat more veg, because just like you, we realize that it's, you've dedicated your life since 2003 to preventing heart disease, rather than actually just operating on it and putting stents in or whatnot. Whereas, it's frustrating in one sense, but I guess it is just, it is the way it is.
It really is. And you're pointing out how difficult it is to get the two sides to work together. That is, we have a bunch of plant-based doctors who have told people not to do stents and bypasses, and to avoid statins, which is probably our number one drug in cardiology. And the joke, not a joke, that statins have ruined the Medicare system in the United States. Why? Because people aren't dead.
It's kept so many people alive.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
because what a statin does is it helps reduce one's cholesterol, or keeps it down lower, so that there's less.
And the LDL cholesterol, but it also reduces inflammation. David Jenkins actually showed that whole food plant-based diet, I'm throwing that in there, whole food plant-based diet and a statin did both the same thing, dropping LDL cholesterol and dropping C-reactive protein. That is the risk outside of cholesterol is inflammation. And that C-reactive protein will tell you how much risk you're at, your inflammatory risk you have, and statins and a plant-based diet lower both. Why wouldn't you put them together? But instead, I have a bunch of doctors eating bad stuff, not focusing on diet, giving statins, and then I have the plant-based doctor saying, don't take statins. If a person doesn't have disease and doesn't have risk, of course they don't need a statin. But if you, and all of our guidelines, American College of Cardiology, American Heart Association guidelines say lifestyle first for prevention, and then you use statins if it's not working for whatever reason. And that's the part, to answer your question, that's the part. How much of it's genetic? It's 100% because we're all human, we're all mammals, and heart disease will be induced if we eat those things. But what you're really asking me is how much is unavoidable? And, the UK has done a better job than the United States. Everybody says that familial hyperlipidemia, which is the one that we are fear, where there's a handful of genes that will code for extremely high LDL cholesterol. Triglycerides on occasion, but LDL cholesterol. And I don't know if you're familiar with the cascade testing that they do in the UK. It's actually highly successful. Last time I was there, Scotland was the one that was kind of dragging their feet. But every pediatrician is supposed to, during infancy, during those well baby visits, supposed to check the cholesterol.
Wow.
And finding those with elevated cholesterol in infancy or early childhood,
Wow.
they can actually go back and find the parents who were in their 20s and 30s, sometimes 40s, and you can find the grandparents. And you can generationally find every single person in the UK who has that gene.
Wow.
So that's a program that we really need in the United States. And I guess because it's somewhere between 1 in 250 to 1 in 500 that have familial hyperlipidemia. And, if you have one of the genes, you get premature heart disease in your 40s or 50s. If you have two of the genes, you're getting it in your 20s or 30s. And so there is a genetic component that can lead to early heart disease, regardless of what you do with diet. Not completely regardless, but because even the people with familial hyperlipidemia, that FH gene, can improve with diet. But recognizing that they have it, that's the most important thing. And as close as we come to the United States is the American Academy of Pediatrics asking people to do a cholesterol test at adolescence. We're not there where the UK is yet.
Wow, yeah. Because I guess like the fact that heart disease builds over our lifetime, starting with, say, as you said, those pediatric tests where they could show that young kids were born with high cholesterol levels. Like it was only through the Vietnam War and the Korean War when they showed with, dead veterans that young 20-year-olds had the buildup of plaque and heart disease in their arteries as 20-year-olds. Whereas most of us, when we think of heart disease, we think, oh, well, it's 50, it's 60, it's 70-year-olds. That's when heart disease happens. But really it builds over a lifetime. Because of one's habits and one's health habits. And I know yourself as a tennis player, like if you play lots of tennis, there's supposedly a risk, tennis players on average live something like 5 years longer because the correlation between moving your body and typically being slim and adopting healthy habits typically lives that you live longer and less likely to die from heart disease. And I wonder if you could talk about the lifestyle component, that's a massive question in terms of heart disease. But for everyone listening who's going, okay, well, heart disease, like it's something which I care about. Like what would be your kind of top tips for anyone in terms of heart disease and reducing the risk or reversing it?
So you said so many things that I need to respond to. First of all, British Medical Journal, not going to short shrift tennis or racket sports. British Medical Journal a few years ago said it was a 17-year life expectancy difference.
Wow.
Now, as
17 years.
17
for tennis,
years.
For those who play tennis and those who don't.
For tennis. And plant-based diet is only supposed to be 15, but hopefully they're additive. Okay. And so
17 years. 15.
There you go. Now, interesting part about that is that I'm looking at the data carefully. I don't see how there's not confounded. That is, just like the data that says kids raised vegan have a 16-point higher IQ. Well, it's probably because they have smarter parents. For tennis players, to play your entire life and not get frustrated and give up or put it on the back burner, you have to be a good player. You have to enjoy it. You have to have more endorphins than frustration from it. And to do that, you have to be a strategic thinker. You actually have to have decent economics. There's so many other factors, but I think you did point out the important one, that, you know, to play successfully, you have to be fit, and you have to train. I don't train by playing tennis. I train for playing tennis. So which is a higher burden if you want to be successful. So this is really complicated. But then you also mentioned, switching quickly, you mentioned early plaque. And the mantra that we're all supposed to be adopting, which I was really hoping that everyone in the world would understand this about heart disease, is lifelong exposure to LDL cholesterol. That is, what is the area under the curve? How high is it? And how long have you had it? And so that's really what you're talking about. And yes, those unfortunate war casualties showing 18-year-olds with plaque, that's now been extended in the United States to 3-year-olds and 8-year-olds type 2 diabetes. That was so-called, when I was in school, that was adult onset diabetes. They had to change the name because kids are getting it. And and then change the name of the disease. It's not just diabetes, it's diabesity because of the obesity epidemic. And so it's all about nutrition. And I'm hoping that we will go forward. So what do I recommend for everybody? Whole food, plant-based diet. And the hardest part is, if I could sort of go tangential just a hair, is making sure that it's a healthy diet. I'm actually still in the middle of the analysis. I think we're shutting down the database all over the world. Every place that I've gone, whether it's tennis or lecturing, I use one of those apps that tell me where there are plant-based restaurants near my phone. I would love to say the name. I say, I wasn't gonna. I don't say plant-based.
Well, that's a free resource. It's a great resource. It is a good one.
Indeed. And so, as it turns out, I do this wherever I go, and I try my best, and I'm sure you guys are into this, to evaluate the healthiness of the food, because just because it's plant-based doesn't mean it's good. And I know so many of my planet sustainabilities and my animal rights colleagues, they really like the vegan ice cream and the vegan beignets and the vegan red velvet cupcakes. And I say, you know, those are really good for the planet, because refined grains increase mortality. So it's good for the planet because it gets rid of humans.
Yeah. Which ultimately means more kind of fossil fuels at some stage, you know.
So far, the preliminary analysis of our data is about, over 360 restaurants. About half are omnivore restaurants that claim to have vegan vegetarian options, and the other half are vegan vegetarian restaurants. And the vegan vegetarian restaurants do offer slightly healthier, more numerous, healthier entrees, but they're all replete with white rice, white flour, and the refined grains. According to the PEAR trial, and Salim Youssef has been doing these trials all over the world, and there's loads of publications. And one of his publications said that saturated fat was better than carbohydrates. Well, why is that, Salim? I'm telling you why. It's because you included refined grains. Refined grains set up a fuel of fire. They raise your LDL cholesterol. They may be worse than eating animals. It's certainly worse than eating saturated fat coming from animals. And so Salim took me seriously and you'll see another publication from his PEAR trial group saying, whoa, it's refined grains. Whole grains are good, refined grains not good.
Wow.
Hard to get that message out.
I guess having worked in food system ourselves, we just see the prevalence and how disconnected we all are. There was a time when, you knew where your potatoes came from. You knew the grower. We were very connected. We were much more agrarian focused. And as society has become increasingly more complex, our foods are coming from further and further and further away. And,
there's just this huge disconnect, and as a result, we don't know our food.
And I was also going to add to that, there's like we've had a cafe restaurant for 20 years, and it's the constant balance between health and taste, and you're constantly finding the right balance, because if you tip off too healthy, your customers who are omnivores, who are used to the standard diet, aren't attracted into it. So you have to find this balance between as healthy as you can while also tasting really good. And on the menu, you have to kind of have a smattering of, health, really healthy, middle healthy, and entry into the, movement or whatnot. So yeah.
You say that very well. And this was not going to be, I wasn't going to publish it because I thought it was too sensitive, but I did notice that, when I used to call them, my vegan runs, trying to preserve my, this was before I got the hip replacement, tennis injury that Andy Murray ended up with. When he got it, I said, oh, and he comes back. Then I said, I'm getting that surgery. And so I'm playing full tilt as if nothing ever happened. But before that, I would have to limit my runs to about 3 miles. So I would go from the hotel where, I'm in Jakarta or Panama City, anything within 1.5 miles, so I could run there, get the food, and then come back, and it'd be less than 3 miles. Those restaurants, when I started listing them, because I had lists of every place I had gone, the number of plant-based restaurants that closed was tremendously high. And so I know what you're saying. That is, if you are trying to feed people completely healthily, and the people are not interested in being completely healthy, it's hard to do that as a business. So kudos to you for doing this for 20 years and keeping it as healthy as you can. Not easy.
Yeah. But I guess it's like that's the challenge. Like it really is, because you're up. It almost feels like we're up against the machine, because we produce a lot of products. We have 80 products like pestos and granolas and snack bars, which are available in supermarkets in Ireland. And it's the challenge, because you're competing with a lot of cheaper foods, which are made of refined flour, refined sugar, refined oils in various different proportions, which have very long shelf lives, and they kind of tend to be quite addictive, and they release dopamine in the brain, but they're not good for people's health. So it's almost like it'd be better if you didn't know this stuff, because then you could your business is more likely to be, a smash hit. But once you know the ethics, it's hard to, and the kind of consequences if we're producing food that's not healthy, we're not ultimately helping people at large. And as a business, you want to try to do it all to run a business that's profitable, that's good for the planet, that's good for people's health, and it's a nice place to work. And that's a challenge in today's field of capitalism, which is not really set up for that.
Well, I'm glad you're taking on that challenge, and hoping that you'll continue to be successful, because it really is a correlation between how unhealthy you are and how much money you can make.
Yeah, true. One thing I want to go straight into in terms of cardiology, Kim, is cholesterol. Many people there can be misguided awareness on cholesterol. Like, cholesterol is a massive predicator. Once one is elevated at cholesterol, they're increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease significantly. And typically it's LDL, isn't it? HDL is deemed the healthier one.
Or less important nowadays.
That was before Canhart and the Copenhagen trials showed that we had it wrong for 60 years. High HDL increases death rate and heart attacks. And to go back and tell all the people who I had told, oh, you're protected because you have an HDL of 100, you got to let them know that's just not true anymore. It never was true. So HDL is a U-shaped curve. If it's really low, we were right about that. That's bad for you. But 2 more points. If it's really high, that's bad, just as bad for you. And the really important one, after torcetrapib, anacetrapib, dalcetrapib, niacin, fibrates, I just go on and on with drugs where we tried to increase HDL, and they either did no good or a slight increase in death rate, and we didn't catch on. And so I hope everyone's heard it by now, because the Copenhagen and Canhart trials came out, like 3 years ago, that HDL is not really good for you. So what do you do about HDL? If it's really low, if you're doing saturated fat and no exercise, you probably ought to stop doing those things. Okay. Because sometimes it's a marker for that kind of thing. But HDL itself, we probably shouldn't spend a lot of time talking about it. LDL, on the other hand, you have those LDL deniers out there, and they're looking at this massive amount of data that says that they're wrong. So LDL is really important, and you can get plaque to go away by removing LDL by any means necessary. We're talking hook you up to, intravenously and do a plasmapheresis, which is a treatment that you could do for the people with familial hyperlipidemia that I was talking about before.
Yeah.
But statins, injectables, this PCSK9 molecule, it is an observation many years ago that some people have an LDL of 7 or 10 when normal the normal people are running around about 90 or 100, and that. We used to think that if your LDL was less than 25, your brain wouldn't work. Well, it turns out that's not true. Babies have an LDL of 10. New Zealand white rabbits have an LDL of 10. People grow fine without a lot of extra cholesterol in their bloodstream. But it turns out that that low cholesterol can actually pull plaque out of your arteries. And so that PCSK9 molecule, you find some people with an LDL of 7 or 10 or 14 because that one molecule is not working. And so what they now try to do is simulate that. And we have several medications that are injectable that can stop that molecule from working, and they dramatically lower LDL cholesterol. What does that molecule do, by the way? Nobody wants to do lipidology 101 on a podcast, but there is a molecule called PCSK9 that tells your LDL receptors to quit and recycles them. And if you don't have that molecule, the LDL receptors just keep taking the LDL out of the bloodstream. And that's a big advantage to those people genetically who are mutants, and anyone who takes one of these drugs that can stop that little molecule from working. But what we've learned over the time is that the PCSK9 inhibitors have data. The statins, only two of them, the strongest ones, rosuvastatin and atorvastatin. The Esselstyn diet, whole food plant-based diet, no oil, and the Ornish diet, whole food plant-based diet. He had, from his first trials, he had some low-fat dairy, but that's gone now. All 5 of those will actually reduce plaque because they get the LDL down so low. And so people saying that LDL is not causing heart disease, I mean, obviously getting plaque to go away is one thing, but as plaque goes down, as LDL goes down, events go down. So they really are related. And I'm hoping that everyone will recognize how important that is. But it's not the only thing. The other candidates are TMAO, this is Cleveland Clinic talking, the trimethylamine N oxide, which dramatically goes down when you stop eating red meat. Animal protein is dangerous, but different animal proteins are different. Eggs would be, pretty decent animal protein if it didn't have that yellow middle, which was so full of cholesterol. Okay, but red meat, giving you, creatine, beta-ene, phosphatidylcholine, and choline. Turns out those fancy sounding chemicals get into your GI tract. And what's in your GI tract when you're eating red meat? People don't realize that when they're eating red meat that they're eating actual decaying flesh. Wow. Hard to imagine that you're actually eating the decaying carcass, and that's decaying because there are bacteria in it that are making the meat decay, and then they populate your gut. And so vegans have a completely that. Very few things that are not affected. And one of the ways it affects it is making this TMAO or trimethylamine, which then your liver converts to TMAO. And, Cleveland Clinic might not be right that causes everything, but it's sure at least is a marker for all kinds of bad stuff. And people end up with the less of that you have in your bloodstream, the less heart attack, stroke, death, diabetes, and renal failure. If it wasn't for those 5 things, you could have all the TMAO you want. And then you have to shout out to Harvard with Paul Ritker talking about inflammatory risk. And we talked about C-reactive protein because it is dramatically improved by a whole food plant-based diet, as I mentioned. But people don't realize it. If you just treat your LDL and you leave your inflammatory risk still there, people don't do well. And the heart attack rate goes up by more than double if you lower the LDL, but the inflammatory risk is still there. So, so it's not all LDL, and people who say, that we're wrong about LDL being the culprit, the literature does not agree with that, but they are making a point that there are other things, and I would point to at least those two. So out of, what do we do? The one thing, there's only one thing that lowers TMAO, LDL, and C-reactive protein, and that's a whole food plant-based diet.
Wow. So really, just to recap what you said, there's HDL now, it's a risk factor, same as LDL. C-reactive protein is inflammation, and then you talked about TMAO, and those are all some of the major kind of risk factors for heart disease. And a whole food plant-based diet is number one in our arsenal in terms of reversing them. Is that the case?
Reversing them, preventing it, absolutely.
Wow. And a whole food plant-based diet, in our experience, can be cheaper than a standard diet in that you're kind of eating peasant food, really. You're eating vegetables and beans and legumes and whole grains, and it's that's the reality rather than it's just a habit. It's just that our society is not set up for it, and people have to learn to cook, which almost seems like it's
an old-fashioned thing to do.
An old-fashioned thing to do, to cook. Oh my God, we can reheat stuff and we can cook basic simple things, but to arm people with the capacity to cook healthy whole foods, you've got to, it starts in the kitchen, really. So I wonder, you've been at this for 45 years, you've been a cardiologist for 45 years, you've been plant-based for 23 years. What do you see is, how do we change this? You're coming towards the later years in your career, and you must be going, where are the big levers? If you in cardiology, you're at the top of your field within it, and you see there's cardiologists. There isn't that many cardiologists that are plant-based. And you've got this expression which is all over the internet. There's two types of cardiologists. There's those who are vegan, and there's those who haven't read the literature yet. So where do you see as the big massive levers in terms of trying to make people move more in this direction?
Well, I'd like to say that, there's going to be some cataclysmic event. It probably would be the planet. And having studies, I believe that medical literature can save lives. And, if you look at the history of epidemics, and I actually got into this because of healthcare disparities, looking at African Americans in the United States having so much more heart disease than other populations. And I started looking at other times when there were healthcare disparities. And guess what? It turns out that in the 18th century, 1700s, there was smallpox. And smallpox was so much worse in the Black population than it was in the whites. But everybody was dying. It's just that it was worse. And it turns out that there was an African slave in Boston who, when he was a kid, he had seen a smallpox outbreak and saw that they would take some of the pustules and inject them into people who hadn't gotten sick yet. And a few of those would get sick and die, but most of them became completely immune to the disease. So vaccination, inoculation. And it took many, many years for that to take over once he started that. But once he did, smallpox was essentially eliminated. And waxing and waning until we had really good vaccines. It happened again with a lot of blacks dying in Panama. And if you know we can spend a lot of time talking about it, but very quickly, the French were really trying to connect, Chinese goods to Europe without having to go around South America. And that's the Panama Canal. And they, scoped out exactly where it should be done and how it should be done and started excavating, and then there's water. And guess what? A lot of this is 1890s, a lot of Western Hemisphere ex-slaves came to try to, feed their families, and the French were paying well. Everything was going good until the dying started. And the dying was because all that standing water led to mosquitoes, and they carried yellow fever. And so so the French gave up, by the way. Meanwhile, 1895, the United States was fighting a war with Spain where more soldiers died from yellow fever than they did from shooting each other. And so the United States Army figured this thing out. And that's why we went back 10 years later and did the Panama Canal without people dying. They figured out mosquito abatement. So anyway, this goes on and on through history. Loads of healthcare disparities. It doesn't have to be black, white. It could be rich, poor. Loads of healthcare disparities. How do you fix it? You come up with a solution, you promulgate that solution, and you make sure that it gets applied. So now we have heart disease that we know exactly how it happens. We know how to treat it. Story ever to say thank you. Having a podcast and talking about this, and hopefully one person will send it to the next, and folks will start to understand that they're in control. And when I said when I took over as president of the American College of Cardiology, I'm giving my introduction speech, and I was very honest. I said, we're in a specialty that should be eliminated the next couple of generations. And I'm hoping that it's not going to take 40, 50 years from the time I said that in 2015. I'm hoping that it's going to happen sooner because of things like artificial intelligence. You're absolutely right. I mean, why did ChatGPT, since you used the term, why did it come up with that answer? Because it's a large language model that actually read all the literature all of a sudden and answered the question. And there is no question. And anyone who, so what's basically happening is that statement that was so controversial that there are those who read the data and haven't figured out how to apply it to themselves and their patients. So if I had to make that statement again, I would say we've got to leave room for people who are just struggling to make that change. But, hopefully that'll happen. Hopefully it won't take 50 years.
Yeah. Amazing that you can actually hope that your field will one day become redundant due to people becoming healthier. And literally that...
Or maybe, well, hopefully it doesn't become redundant because we're all dead.
No.
Because that seems like at the moment, that seems like more of a probability that we become extinct than we, just at the moment, but maybe we're at the halfway point of the movie and we haven't reached the climax where we're all going to save the world and, maybe become more conscious of our food choices and how they impact our own health and the planet and the animal welfare.
Well, I know this is not probably the show to talk about it, but I have become more sensitive to, animal rights issues and, trying to, be kinder to sentient beings and, growing them in places that produce a lot of, greenhouse gases. That can't be the solution. And, we do have to take care of things other than just human health. But if we could partner with everybody to try to get the planet and the animals taken care of, then, I'm looking forward to cardiology involuting. There'll still be some cardiology. There's people who are born with rhythm disturbances, but I would think it's probably somewhere around 5 or 10% of what we do now.
Wow.
The rest will be gone.
Amazing. And one thing I was thinking of there in terms of you've got a large faculty at Rush University. How have you do you try to inspire some of that faculty to become more plant-based, or the more plant-curious cardiologists on your faculty, or how does that
Or
fare?
is there a lot of opposition going, Kim and his vegetables?
Because I remember you saying when you first became the president of the American College of Cardiology, you were the American president, and it was the first time it was going to be a black president. What a big deal! But you were labelled as the first vegan head of the American Center for Cardiology rather than the black one. So it was because
That's
that
right.
was more of a deal to be vegan than black.
Indeed. And you're absolutely right. And when I was at Rush, so I've been gone from Rush for almost 2 years now.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm actually moved from cardiology to chair of medicine.
Wow.
And so I have a wonderful cardiology division. It's very productive, very prevention minded, which is tremendous. And I think I have more plant-based physicians here at University of Louisville than I did at Rush. And, Rush was wonderful, high quality clinical care for anybody who's in that area. Prevention was not as big on the radar as clinical quality. And that's not a criticism. That's what Rush is good at. And so, you'd have people at fancy other universities, but if their parent got sick, they took them to Rush. Okay. So that's what it's for. But that's management and, making sure that people get the best outcome that they can. That's what that place was for. As opposed to Louisville, the University of Louisville really was affected, I think, coming in from the outside. Everybody heard the name George Floyd, and most heard Breonna Taylor. There's tragic things that happened, early on during COVID. Well, Breonna Taylor was a University of Louisville nursing assistant, and that police-related tragedy really galvanized the community, but also the university. And the president at the time, President Bundapali, actually went public saying they wanted to be the anti-racist university for the community, for the country. And so here I come a couple years later when they're asking for a new chair, and I, didn't have all that much design. I loved being a chief of cardiology. But in talking to them, it became clear that what I wanted to do was health equity, as I talked a lot about that, from smallpox to polio to heart disease, and prevention. And they were really interested in that because they thought that is the anti-racist thing to do, is to try to relieve the burden of disease in the community that we have. And I have to tell you that Louisville is a bit different than Chicago and Detroit. There's poverty and on one side of the city more than the other. It's less racial than it is economic. So our health equity screenings, screening for heart disease, risk factors, all of that, the stuff that we do down here, early detection, get people in, get people to help us pay for their care, get the state to help us, which they really do. It's a very different environment. And yes, we have a chapter of Walk with the Doc, where people can come and just do exercise and get advice, just walking in a park. And yes, we do screenings for everywhere. You have a Juneteenth celebration with 2,000 people in a park. We're going to be there with our booths to check their cholesterol and their blood pressure and tell them what their 10-year risk is from the little calculator. So a lot more community activities and a lot more interest in prevention than any place I've been in the past. So it's good. Shout out to, people know about Louisville Cardinals because of like basketball and now football. No, this is really a place where there's a caring for the community that's unmatched around the country.
That's very, very encouraging to hear. Really, really is. And okay, final question is just in terms of that you said there's a bigger risk factor in terms of, Black Americans versus white Americans in terms of heart disease. And is that like, obviously there's an equity thing in terms of money and finances and resources and all this type of thing. Is there a genetic predisposition, or is it just purely down to lifestyle and economic prosperity or access to resources, or what is your understanding of that?
A lot of understanding of it. And the only genetic thing you could argue, and people have argued, that there's more hypertension in the Black community because of salt sensitivity, being us all being descendants of people who were brought here in these slave boats with very little access to water, and those who did not dehydrate and die became our gene pool. That's been argued back and forth. But our African Americans seem to be more salt sensitive. You could argue that we are. Okay, fine. But nobody, white or Black or Asian, should be doing a lot of sodium. Okay. And so if you leave that little genetic thing out, it's a lot of habit and culture. There's a wonderful cardiologist, African-American, Columbus Batiste. He's over at Kaiser. I think he's running the cardiovascular service line. You've probably heard of him and heard of his show. Exactly. He's got a show called The Slave Food. So what that's about is that, it sounds terrible, but the fact of the matter is the African-American slaves would subsist on whatever was being thrown out. So organ meats, things that the people in the big house did not actually want to eat. And so the going whole hog meant that you would eat all different parts of the pig, and they became sort of African-American, delights and specialties in figuring out how to cook, chitlins, which is basically, the small bowel, as an example, fat back and neck bones and the like. And so this was called out years ago by University of Alabama, Birmingham in the REGARDS study, showing that all of the risk and the mortality of the American diet is a whole lot is magnified by the African-American or soul food way of eating. That's more organ meats, more sugar-sweetened beverages. Yams are great. Candied yams, where you put a bunch of sugar in it, not so great. And so we have had data for quite a while that our risk has to do with our diet. And when African Americans do a whole food plant-based diet, that risk is lifted, and that's what we're hoping to do. But it's not just that, and I'm going to say it's not just heart disease, and it's not just African American. If you look, now that I'm in Kentucky and I have a little bit broader knowledge, Eastern Kentucky, the so-called Appalachia, we all pronounced it wrong, calling it Appalachia. Those Appalachians whites have higher degrees of heart disease than blacks do. And it's the same dietary patterns and the same kind of lack of health care, access, and lack of prevention. And so what I've learned by moving out of the south side of Chicago and west side of Chicago and inner city Detroit, what I've learned is that a lot of this is what you were saying. It's economic. It's not just racial. It's not genetic. It's economic. And we need to do better as a country in making sure that people who are underserved are, distinguishing underserved and undeserved is something that we don't do well enough. Okay. And if we get our screening programs and detect who's got coronary heart disease and get them in and get them managed and get their lifestyle changed, we can really make a difference. I would say that the last comment that when I said it's not just blacks and it's not just heart disease. One of the biggest issues for the heart is when the kidneys go bad. So I've had to become a kind of a cardio-nephrologist, and the recognition is just daunting that African Americans are 12% of the population, with 35% of the dialysis patients. And if anyone would go to their, I don't know brand name, so go to their search engine and put in red meat dialysis, you will see this massive literature come up saying that all of the chronic kidney disease and progression to end-stage renal disease that needs dialysis is due to animal protein. And asking everyone who is treating people who have chronic kidney disease when it's stage 2, before it gets to stage 5, to put them on a plant-based diet. And the number of nephrologists outside of University of Louisville and University of San Diego, or California, San Diego, very few kidney doctors are paying attention to the whole food plant-based solution for their patients. So we need a lot more of the data getting out to people. It is not just cardiologists who are, vegan or not reading the data. It's now nephrology, it's neurology, it's a massive amount of medical specialties. There are very few diseases you can look up and say, okay, I've got this disease. What happens with a vegan diet? And everything from lupus to anxiety and depression, all of them have a literature for whole food plant-based diet, making it better.
It sounds like we need in the medical team, we need a lot more people who can support people in making these shifts, because it's a whole lifestyle and behavioural change thing.
But it's
to
also
change
a
to have
whole
whole food
societal
plant-
change. It needs to be like government led. It needs to be supported. It needs to be food systems. Like
But- and make
certain
it- make-
companies are given are taxed because they're selling unhealthy foods. Certain ones that are like it's a full system change. If we're going to celebrate human health as opposed to profit.
You got me there.
Unfortunately, that's the
I would tell you that the current administrator in the White House put it together a nutrition, health, and hunger conference, September of 2022. First time in over 50 years. Richard Nixon had done it in the late 60s. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of us were asked to give recommendations, and I was making those kind of recommendations. And to hear the president get up and say most of the things that I was saying, along with recommendations of a lot of other people, was really great. The question is, can you really do it? So some of those things, so the one that we published on, if you Google my name, and the article title is Marketing Mortality, showing television commercials with unhealthy food, particularly to children and to minorities, because our poorer population tends to watch more television than the people who are making a lot of money working. It turns out that the unhealthiness of the food is actually, changing the buying habits and the eating habits of the population. So why not change that? We did it for cigarettes. You can't have cigarette advertisement on television. But that was the one that no one touched. But all the rest of them, like we have a food program for the poor called the SNAP, and increasing the amount of healthy food that you can buy with SNAP privileges. That's great. How about labeling red, yellow, and green in the grocery store? That is, if processed meat is a World Health Organization Group 1 carcinogen, there ought to be a label on that saying this is red. If you want to eat it, you can, but you probably should be doing this once or twice a year. And then there's yellow stuff, which maybe it's not optimal, but it's not immediately harmful. And then you've got green, because this is healthy. This will actually make your diseases get better, et cetera. That's been tried in a few countries, never in UK or Ireland, and not in the United States that I've seen. I'm hoping that one actually gets executed, even if it's just a pilot program, because when it was done in Austria and done in France, it changed behavior. And we could make people healthy just by labeling the food. The FDA wants to label the food better, and they're getting a lot of pushback. But talking to Rob Califf about this, he wants to flip the sodium content, saturated fat, cholesterol content to the front instead of being on the back. And that would have a big help.
I was amazed even in terms of label reading, because label reading is such an important part of this. And in Europe, it's a bit easier to read labels, but in the US, it's very confusing in terms of pack size and nutritional data per pack size, and it's 5 servings in the pack. Like it wasn't set up for the consumer to understand, is this a healthy product or not? It was set up to kind of almost be confusing.
Right.
Yeah.
If the more unhealthy you are, the more sodium you have, you want to make that portion size really small, knowing that people are going to eat the whole bag. but if you make the portion size small, then it looks reasonable. And I guess that's marketing, but that's the healthfulness of marketing is something that's sorely lacking.
Yeah. Okay. We've covered it all here today. We really have. You, as well as being a huge inspiration, it's been absolutely gorgeous to talk to you. You're a beautiful, you have a lovely presence about you. It was really nice to I felt like I was really hanging out with you. It was lovely. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Well, I appreciate your having me, and hopefully you'll continue doing what you're doing, and get the larger following and get everyone to really change and just think through the connection between nutrition and health. We're all going to be better off.
Yeah, you're wonderful, Kim. I look forward to seeing you again at some stage when you're over at some tennis event.
Okay, absolutely. Hoping to haven't made any Wimbledon plans yet, but definitely looking forward to the next event.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Mel, for your time,
Thanks,
Kim. You're
Kim.
wonderful.
Thanks a million.
Keep flying the flag.
All right, absolutely.
All the best.
Thanks
Have a great
again.
day. Bye.
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 Thank you.
All the best. Cheers.
Thank you. All right, bye-bye.
While we have you, once a week we write a newsletter. It's called Happier. It's got simple, tried and tested practices to make your life better. We include recipes and practices that you can apply on a daily basis to make your life happier. We've had lots of people say before that it's really helped make their life better. So you can sign up on the happypear.ie, our weekly newsletter called Happier.